All right, let's jump right into this explainer. We're going to unpack the compounding failures that turn the world's absolute most luxurious ship into one of history's deadliest disasters. We all know the name Titanic, but today we're looking at the specific, fatal sequence of events and, frankly, the sheer human hubris that caused the unthinkable to actually happen.
So we start our journey on April 14th, 1912. It was this incredibly cold, silent night. The ocean was completely calm. I mean, it looked just like dark glass with thousands of stars shining in the sky. And the largest ship in the world was just tearing across the Atlantic Ocean at full speed. Inside, it was a total scene of joy. People were eating dinner, they were dancing, laughing, dreaming about a brand new future in America. Literally nobody knew that within just a few hours, this beautifully peaceful scene was going to turn into utter chaos.
2,200. That is the staggering number of souls on board this floating city. Just think about that for a second. Over 2,200 people, completely unaware of the massive tragedy waiting for them in the dark waters just ahead.
Which brings us to Section 1, the unsinkable floating city, a marvel of luxury and overconfidence. Let's look at the unbelievable hubris surrounding the creation of this massive vessel.
You see this dangerous nickname, the unsinkable ship? That really illustrates the core problem right there. The company that built it, the White Star Line, had this absolute blind faith that the ship could never, ever go down. And because it looked like a floating city, complete with swimming pools, luxury gyms, grand dining halls, and that massive staircase that just amazed everyone, the creators and the public basically just suspended their common sense.
The ship had originally left Southampton, England on April 10th. And look at the stark contrast between the passengers here. Up in first class, you've got rich businessmen and millionaires traveling in unprecedented luxury. Meanwhile, down in third class, you've got poor families and workers holding on to all their hopes for a better life in America. Everyone on board carried these huge dreams for the future, but they were about to face very different and incredibly tragic fates.
This leads us to Section 2, a chain of fatal mistakes, the perfect storm of human error. What's really fascinating and tragic here is that the disaster wasn't just one freak accident. It was a compounding sequence of mistakes.
Just look at these compounding failures. First, there's the deadly arrogance. Because they thought it was unsinkable, they only packed enough lifeboats for about half the passengers. Wild, right? Second, despite getting several warnings from nearby ships about large icebergs, Captain Edward Smith just did not slow down. He wanted to arrive early and set a new speed record. Third, the lookout crew literally had no binoculars to spot ice in the freezing dark. And finally, there's this deeply ironic tragedy. The ocean was unusually calm. You see, if there had been waves, the white water crashing around the base of the iceberg might have been visible from far away. But because the water was like flat, dark glass, that iceberg was practically invisible.
Moving to Section 3, Iceberg right ahead, the collision in the dark. Let's fast forward to 11:40 p.m. This is the exact moment everything changed.
Just imagine the sheer terror of this moment. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a massive iceberg appears in the darkness. A lookout, who is desperately straining his eyes without any binoculars, shouts this huge warning into the freezing night air.
The officers immediately tried to turn the massive ship, but it was just too late. The right side of the Titanic scraped right against the iceberg. And what's really chilling here is that the collision didn't even feel very strong. Many passengers barely noticed it. Some people even joked about it, picking up chunks of ice that fell onto the deck. But below the surface, the ship had already been fatally wounded.
Here we are at Section 4, panic and freezing water, the fight for survival. So while people were joking above deck, a terrifying reality was setting in below the surface.
The crucial point to understand here is this horrifying dramatic irony. Several compartments were rapidly filling with freezing water, and the crew slowly realized the unsinkable Titanic wasn't going to make it. But at first, the passengers weren't told the truth. Up above deck, musicians actually continued playing music to maintain this illusion of safety, and tons of passengers still fully believed the ship was completely fine. But below deck, freezing water is just flooding in. And to make matters worse, closed doors and passageways made escape incredibly difficult for poorer families in third class. So panic slowly starts to spread as the front of the ship begins sinking into the ocean.
And then we get to the absolute mismanagement of the evacuation. As panic really set in, lifeboats designed to carry 60 people were leaving the ship with only 20 or 25 passengers. They were being launched practically half empty.
Women and children were prioritized, of course, and first-class passengers got much faster access, which left so many folks in third class literally trapped below.
Yet, amidst all these terrifying scenes of screaming, running, and this freezing wind, we absolutely have to recognize the incredible acts of bravery and humanity that night. The musicians played on until the very end just to keep people calm. Wealthy men gave up their guaranteed seats for women and children. Husbands flat out refused to leave their wives behind, and Captain Edward Smith chose to go down with his ship.
But all that bravery couldn't change the environment. -2 degrees Celsius. That single number represents the most horrifying part of the night. Most people who fell into the water didn't drown. They died within minutes from hypothermia. The desperate screams echoing in the darkness were just absolutely heartbreaking.
Watch how these final hours build to this tragic conclusion. At 11:40 p.m., they struck the iceberg. Over the next few agonizing hours, Titanic fired distress rockets into the sky. And here's the crazy part. Another ship, called the Californian, was relatively close by, like close enough that hundreds of lives could have been saved if they had just responded in time. But their radio operator had already gone to sleep. By 2:20 a.m., the back section of the Titanic lifted high into the air. The massive ship broke apart and slowly disappeared beneath the water forever.
Which brings us to Section 5, the tragic aftermath. What remained in the darkness? Let's look at the dawn that followed, and the ultimate, horrifying cost of this historic hubris. Hours later, another ship named the Carpathia finally reached the area to rescue survivors. But by the time help finally arrived, the desperate cries had stopped. Most of the victims had already perished in the freezing ocean. Within a matter of hours, the world's greatest ship was simply gone, leaving behind nothing but freezing water, floating debris, and a really haunting silence.
The numbers from that night are just devastating. Out of the 2,200 people on board, more than 1,500 died. Only around 700 survived. It was this massive loss of thousands of dreams, and it directly resulted from the overconfidence and systemic failures we discussed at the very start of this explainer.
For decades, the ship was completely lost to history, until 1985, when the Titanic's wreck was finally discovered. Even today, resting 12,500 feet below the surface of the Atlantic Ocean in pitch darkness, the remains of the Titanic serve as a permanent, ghostly monument to human vulnerability and the extreme dangers of arrogance.
You see, the Titanic didn't just sink because of an iceberg. It sank because of an absolute faith in an unsinkable system. The lack of lifeboats, the speed, having no binoculars, it all stemmed from the belief that failure was somehow impossible. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to reflect on. What unsinkable systems do we blindly trust today? Where is our modern overconfidence setting us up for disaster? Thanks for walking through this explainer with me. Keep questioning the systems around you and never let overconfidence blind you to the icebergs in your own path.